Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by iMazing2 and Riedel. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right, but do you think we're going to survive this month? I'm starting to wonder a little bit.
Well, I gotta come to Chicago next month, so I have to.
All right.
At least I need to survive another month. Then I guess we'll see.
Okay,
But yeah, it's gonna be a busy month, man. It's gonna be a busy couple of weeks.
Yeah,
starting today.
Yes. Today's a very big day, and I think at least I hope it'll calm down a little bit next week. But it's fun too, as well as busy. So why don't you preview for everybody a little bit of what we've got going on this week, and tease maybe what's coming up at the rest of the month.
Well, so of course the review that I've been working on for 3 months, my iOS 11 review, just launched today on MacStories. You can read it on the site. There's a free ebook version for members of Club MacStories, and the new type of extra that we did this year is a separate audiobook version that is available at $9.99, and if you're a member, it's available at $3.99. So this is a separate offering that we came up with. I worked on this with my friend Mike Hurley. He's the narrator of the audiobook. I think he did an excellent job, and so go check out on MacStories. There's all the details for the review, the ebook, and the audiobook. But besides my review and all this, there's this very special episode of App Stories about it. There's also an episode of Connected about the review. On the site this week, you will see a ton of app reviews and app coverage about iOS 11 app updates and brand new iOS 11 apps. So we've been able to test dozens of apps that are going to add drag and drop support, ARKit integration, or a new design on iOS 11, files integration with file providers and the document browser, all kinds of apps that have been updated for iOS 11. And you will see under macstories.net/tag/iOS 11, we have a dedicated hub that is linked everywhere on the site, and you will see a ton of app coverage there. In addition, September is also the anniversary month for Club MacStories. We've been working to organize multiple waves of discounts on excellent Mac and web applications. And also we have giveaways, fun extras for members. There's also a special episode of App Stories called App Stories Unplugged, going out exclusively to members of Club MacStories this week. So also on the club front, there's a ton of extra content. There's a ton of special deals. And finally, on Friday, you will also get, if you're a Club MacStories member, you will get a making of, behind-the-scenes look at my iOS 11 review. And then finally, over the next few weeks, we'll get to cover even more iOS 11 apps. We have our reviews of macOS High Sierra. This week we're gonna cover watchOS 4, tvOS 11, all the great stories, all the great articles.
Yes, and that is the reason I'm wondering whether we're going to survive. But we've actually gotten pretty far into this. I mean, your review's obviously out, so that lets us breathe a little deeply. But we do have a lot more coming up, so definitely come by macstories.net. And if you're a club member, check back regularly because we're going to have a lot of things launching in the next couple of weeks. Thanks to iMazing for sponsoring App Stories this week. It's important to back up your devices before you move to iOS 11. iMazing is a great tool for this because it lets you peer right inside your backup so you can make sure that everything is in order before you start the iOS 11 update process. I use it to back up both my iPhone and my iPad regularly. And those backups, you can roll back to any particular one that you want. It's super easy. Besides that, you can even get content in and out of your iPhone or iPad very easily with iMazing. I've done things like take a message thread with thousands of messages between me and Federico dealing with MacStories and turned it into a plain text file that's easily searchable. It's a great way to create an archive of your conversations with people. But you can also move things back and forth like music or videos on and off your iPhone or iPad. iMazing is also on top of all the latest developments. Their team of developers has worked hard to implement conversion options to ensure that new image and video formats are compatible with older versions of macOS and third-party software. They even found a way around an APFS-related bug that prevented some users from backing up iOS devices locally during the iOS 10.3.3 and iOS 11 betas. They know their stuff. Now more than ever, as iTunes starts to shed features, iMazing is a great complement to your iOS devices. It lets you access and manage all your mobile content. Thanks again to iMazing for supporting the show. So, Federico, I wanted to, before we dig into some things about your review, I wanted to quickly follow up on the episode we did a couple episodes ago about breaking up iTunes, because I think Apple must have been listening because they've started breaking up iTunes very, very quickly. I mean, before even macOS High Sierra launched, they've updated iTunes and pulled the App Store completely out of the app.
Wow. Yeah, I was so surprised to see that.
Yeah, no, I think when we spoke, we imagined a future where everything was broken up into separate apps, but we didn't, I think, expect the App Store to be so immediately and abruptly pulled out without any alternative for how to deal with apps. And maybe that's coming, but right now, as we speak, the iOS App Store is out of iTunes, and there's no way to download iOS apps to your Mac, which, I think most people do find apps on their iOS devices anyway, and that in that sense, it's not a big deal. But one of the things I discovered this week is that when you click on a link on a Mac to an iOS app, it does this really crazy dance between Safari and iTunes because it redirects to iTunes, goes back to Safari, goes back to iTunes, goes back to Safari. I counted and it was 5 trips between iTunes and Safari. And in the end, I ended up with 2 tabs with an iOS app preview in them. So that's obviously a little broken, and I hope that something gets fixed there.
It seems to me like it was almost like a rushed decision or that maybe some miscommunication happened between the iTunes team and the App Store team and the web team that deals with opening web previews and redirecting to iTunes, because clearly the system is half broken right now, and there's too many edge cases. And even I was taking a look at the video that you recorded, and that was crazy. So I think what we were expecting was like maybe a separate iOS App Store app, or maybe some kind of web presence so that you could browse the App Store on the web and initiate downloads from your web browser. And so that those downloads would automatically be downloaded on your iOS devices. Instead, we got the simplest solution. Just get rid of apps and the App Store from iTunes altogether.
Yeah.
And this introduces some issues maybe for folks who have been keeping their iTunes library neatly organized. For example, I know people that used to keep a back catalog of old apps in their iTunes installations, in their iTunes libraries, because those apps were not available on the App Store anymore, like old games, or like I know people that still keep Tweety, for example, in iTunes, because they don't like to lose those apps. And so it's in a way it isn't the end of an era to not have the apps in iTunes anymore. I know that way before I used to work entirely from my iPhone and my iPad, I used to spend every single afternoon hitting command refresh, command R in iTunes on the Mac to check for app updates to cover on MacStories. So we come a long way from that. Now the iOS App Store is completely redesigned. People have gotten used to browsing the App Store, you don't need iTunes anymore. But it's still surprising to me that almost on a whim, with a single update, with basically no notice, Apple just removed the App Store from iTunes completely.
Yeah, I've noticed it's been disruptive to me already because the first time I really noticed it was when I was doing a review of pCalc, which has an iOS 11 update. And I went to go grab a link to pCalc, and I was like, oh, I can't do that. I was on my Mac. I can't do that in iTunes like I used to. Now I could Google it because those app previews are still there in Google, and you can create an affiliate link out of that. But this is going to have a couple of consequences. I mean, first of all, to the extent people rely on affiliate linking for revenue websites, they're going to take something of a hit because people aren't going to be able to download on their Mac if a site has significant desktop traffic. That could be difficult. It doesn't impact restoring. I mean, I know we immediately thought, how do we restore iPhones? But you can still do that in iTunes. So it's really just the store that's been pulled out of iTunes, not the syncing and restoring and things like that with an iPhone or an iPad. So that's kind of interesting. But the core of iTunes now is really just video and audio. You've got audiobooks, podcasts, music, and then you have TVs and movies. That's really, they got rid of ringtones too. They kept they kept that strange internet radio thing in there still, but they moved it to your library, which is really odd to me. But it's in there still. I don't know. They got rid of a few other things as well.
So basically, we're going back to what almost to what iTunes originally was meant to be, which
Right.
is a music player with some video sprinkled on top.
Yep.
So we're going back to that essentially.
Yeah, I think we are. And I still think that we may see video split off at some point, but I don't think they're ready to go quite that far yet. And obviously, there's not been a solution. There's not a separate solution for syncing or restoring and that sort of thing. We had imagined some sort of separate app utility that could be used, and that doesn't exist yet. All that's really happened is Apple's stripped out some of the content that was previously there.
Well, we talked about this. Seems like the maybe not the end, but some considerable changes to iTunes are coming, and it certainly looks like Apple is cleaning house.
I don't think we've seen the last of it.
Yeah, I mean, whether that means that iTunes as a product name and as an app will go back to being just a music player, or if it means that this dismantlement of iTunes will continue and we'll see Apple Music and videos go with to separate apps. At that point, if the second solution is the case, then we should probably say goodbye to iTunes.
Thanks to Riedel for sponsoring App Stories this week. Riedel has built a complete ecosystem of productivity apps for professionals who want the best experience possible, all of which support drag and drop on iOS 11. Sure, Apple has added scanning, file management, and PDF annotation to iOS 11, but that's only going to serve to educate professionals who want the very best experience and deeper functionality of Riedel's apps. Take Spark, for instance. Riedel started by building a great email client for personal use, and this fall they're going to launch a new take on email for teams. Then next year, Riedel is planning to add AI to provide proactive email assistance. Be sure to check out all their apps on Riedel.com. Thanks again to Riedel for supporting the show. Well, so let's dig into your review because we've got a lot to talk about there. And I thought what we would talk about today is the apps that you use to create the review. Everything from when you went into that keynote at WWDC to the minute you press the publish button on your review. And I want to talk about what that whole process was like. And I think we could break this down by kind of the planning and research phase, then the writing phase, and then the production phase. Because as you pointed out at the very get-go of the show, there's a lot more to this than just the review on the website. You've got the ebook, you've got the audiobook, there's a lot of design work that goes into this, special things related to the website, all sorts of things happening. So I thought we'd go over some of those apps as well, and some of the ones that you feature in the review, because you've got some really good examples of third-party apps that highlight some of the special features and new features in iOS 11. So yeah, why don't we start with just the planning phase? I know you went to the keynote back in June at WWDC, and you used notes, right? What else did you use in the planning phase?
So yeah, I would say that in the very early days, in the planning stage, obviously at the keynote, I was keeping notes. I had a note in the Apple Notes app. And of course, when the iPad segment came up at the keynote, I stopped typing because I just had to look at the stage. I couldn't concentrate on taking notes. But basically, for the first week, as I was in WWDC, as I was in San Jose for WWDC, I did two things. Either I thought of something and I made a note for myself in a note that was called iOS 11 Thoughts and Ideas, I think, or I marked interesting tweets with a fave on Twitter, and later, usually when I was back in the hotel room at night, I went through those tweets and I saved them with the notes extension to the bottom of my note. So for the first week, I would say I tried to collect as much as possible, like little details, ideas, some thought about a specific feature. I tried to collect everything into a single place, and this note grew very, very long.
I can imagine.
It was an insanely long note, and I knew that meant that as soon as I was back home, I needed to seriously take a look at the note and split it up in some way and organize all those thoughts. One of my biggest concerns when I was approaching my stay in San Jose, I was also working on my review of the 10.5-inch iPad Pro. My biggest concern was that after the week in San Jose, and because of all the, I was really tired because I needed to put together this review in a short amount of time. I was worried that as soon as I got back home, I would get sick like I did last year. But thankfully, I didn't. So I managed to. It only took me like a day to recover from the jet lag, and so early in the week, as soon as I came back, I started taking a look at the note, and I realized that unlike last year, I wanted to have multiple separate notes for each chapter of the review. So I created a note for the intro, one note about setup, a separate note for the iPad and Apple Music. All the topical notes became individual chapters. And at that point, I basically opened the WWDC on my app on my iPad Pro, and I went through all the videos of the sessions that I didn't go to, and I hit the download button. And I should mention that I also had a separate folder in the Notes app called WWDC Sessions, where I kept notes from the sessions that I attended. And at that point, I would say for the next 3 weeks, what I did was I spent every single day either watching a session video and taking notes, or organizing the notes that I already had, and cutting and pasting things into the chapter they belong to. So I moved things around. I tried to give it a structure as I was cutting and pasting. And also, I was already using iOS 11. So I was already testing drag and drop to move text around, to move screenshots around. So until I think June 25, June 26, I basically just took notes, organized my notes, and tried to come up with a rough idea of the structure of the review.
At what point did you start using iThoughts? Was that during this time or was it after?
I think sometime toward the end of this process.
Okay.
After I had all my notes and I had all my notes organized, I opened iThoughts and I created a new mind map. And I would say I should go through my tweets again because I've tagged them all with the iOS 11. I think, was it teacher review hashtag
Yeah.
maybe? So I think the mind map happened in the final week of June and maybe the first week of July. As I was finalizing my notes, I started transforming those notes into a mind map. So this second step, this second layer of organization is meant to go from a structured series of notes to a visual organization in chapters and sections. It's in this stage that I realized how many chapters I wanted to have and how to split up those chapters in sections and subsections. That process remained fluid until the very end. I mean, even last week I decided to rename a section and to merge a section with one another. But the core of the review's structure was done in that stage when the notes were becoming a mind map. And there was also an occasion for me to cut back on some notes, exclude some points, remove repetitions, because for example, many times I take the same note, or I save the same thought twice or maybe three times, because iOS is just so massive as an operating system. There's just so many things to talk about. I think it's normal that you repeat yourself and you think, oh, I didn't know this. Well, you actually knew this because you had a screenshot about this.
Yeah, no, I find that happening to me all the time, and every now and then I'll be ready to send you a message or something saying, "Did you know you can do X?" And then I think to myself, no, if I send this to Federico, he's just going to tell me, yes, that's been there since beta 1, and you forget something's there sometimes because there's just so much.
Yeah. Also, for the mind map, I was lucky enough that the developer of iThoughts sent me an iOS 11 beta by the end of June. So I was able to transport my notes from notes to iThoughts using drag and drop, which allowed me to really understand the potential for this feature, which I think is truly transformative on the iPad. It's probably the biggest section of my review. It's the entire explanation about drag and drop. So I was able to test this functionality as I was preparing for the writing process. And that was really useful.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And so you worked on that kind of beginning of July, and then I know you had a nice long period of a couple of weeks by yourself while your girlfriend was out of town, and you were able to just write for a long period of time. What was the what sort of apps did you use during the writing process? I assume you used Ulysses, right?
Yes, this year the review was entirely written and mostly edited in Ulysses. The biggest change this year for me was being just by myself and the dogs for 2 weeks instead of 1 week in July. So usually my girlfriend she's busy in the second week of July for a week, but this time it was 2 weeks. So I had 14 full days where the only thing that I needed to worry about was writing, taking care of the dogs, and making sure that I was eating and taking a shower and taking a walk every once in a while.
Not always easy to remember when you're working that hard, I know.
Yes, it really is. So those 2 weeks of writing, if you take a look at the review on the site, you can easily see the way that it's structured. There's a big first half where it's the intro, it's the design, it's all changes to privacy, to the system keyboard, and of course all the major system apps. And then there's the iPad/productivity half where I talk about iPad, I talk about files, and I talk about everything else in iOS 11. I talk about Siri. So there's clearly two halves to this review. And I also try to split it up this way in terms of my schedule. So in the first week, I wrote from the intro to the apps section. So from intro to photos. Then the second week, I just focused on iPad. The iPad chapter, which by itself, I think it's 15,000 something
Wow.
words, I did in the second week that I was working by myself at home. And that left files. Actually, I think I did from intro to files, not from intro to apps.
Okay.
It was from intro to files. And that left Siri, App Store, everything else, and the conclusion to do between July and my goal was mid-August.
Notifications, I think you saved to last too, didn't you?
Notifications also, you're right. So I had 5 chapters, I think, in total, because I knew that changes to notifications and to cover sheet were coming. So I decided to wait, and that was one of my best decisions, because otherwise I would have had to rewrite the entire chapter because Apple made some major changes to notifications.
Yeah, that was a very good call, because you're right. They did reverse course on that pretty dramatically during the betas.
The apps that I used at this point were mostly Ulysses and Safari for research and iThoughts. So Ulysses and iThoughts in split view, usually with Safari in slide over. That's one of the great things of iOS 11. You can use 3 apps at once on the 2017 iPad Pros. I was working on my 12.9-inch iPad Pro, the 2017 model, the one that I had to bring to the Apple Store a few weeks ago because it was bent. I probably used it too much. I don't know. The other apps that I used were DevonThink, where I set up a dedicated iOS 11 review folder. And inside that folder, I created a bunch of subfolders for all the single betas of iOS. As I was taking screenshots during the beta stage, I saved those screenshots into their associated folders. So I have screenshots for beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, etc. And those screenshots were useful in the final editing process to go back and sort of reassess the way that some features have changed, or maybe if there was some kind of version of a screenshot that I wanted to use again. So I needed to take a fresh screenshot from the GM.
Now, when you did that, did you also create a set of iOS 10 screenshots so you could kind of compare the before and after, or did you just keep a device around that had iOS 10 on it so you could do that towards the end?
I didn't do that in July or in August. I did that last week
Okay.
because I was saving this. The entire screenshot and video production I saved for the last week.
Yes, and if you look through the review, you can tell because you can see there. At least I especially can tell because I can see that there's some of these screenshots that have conversations that you and I had just several days ago. It's not. It was very much at the last stage of preparing the review.
I try to. Most of the screenshots are from the GM build of iOS 11. There's probably 5, 6 of them. There are from beta 10, so basically GM, because visually there are no changes, but on principle it kind of bugs me. But they were really the same visually. I double checked and I already took them in beta 10, so I left them in because it's fine.
Right.
It's just an issue on principle that they are not from the GM seed, but they are actually visually indistinguishable from the GM version.
Okay, I get that. Yeah. So you at this point during this, I guess, July, early August stage, you were mostly working in Ulysses, right?
Yeah. I was basically laser focused on writing, and all the writing was done in Ulysses in multiple sheets for each chapter. I think I talked about this before. I was leaving placeholders for future images, future videos, future comments. And also at this point, I can finally talk about it. Most of the placeholders were instructions for Mike because Mike was preparing to narrate the audiobook. Mike was waiting for my finalized chapters. And so if I wanted Mike to add some special sound effects or some Easter eggs, or if I didn't want Mike to read a certain bit of the review, like a pull quote, there's no point in reading a pull quote.
Right.
I was leaving comments for Mike for later. And the comments were literally stuff like, Mike, do not read this in all caps. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen them. Right. Oh, that makes sense. So throughout the summer you're writing, and at what point do you start transitioning towards production and starting using different tools?
Another big change this year is that my reviews were always edited like in depth by me mostly. And this time I had Ryan helping me out with the editing. And Ryan has been amazing because he's the kind of obsessive editor that I like to be as well. And so every chapter has been edited, I think, 7 times by Ryan and I. We went over every single sentence and every single link and every single punctuation argument that we had. And honestly, I don't think my review has been as polished and as well edited as it is this time. And I think you can tell that we went over and over some stylistic choices, and to avoid stuff like repetition as much as possible, and to make sure that the review had both a good reading flow and also a good visual flow. And between late July and August, as I was still finalizing some chapters, we had already started working on editing and sending the PDFs to Mike. So think of it this way. While I was still writing chapter 15, at the same time, Ryan and I were also editing chapter 1, 2, 3, 4. And so there were like 2 separate lanes at this point, and I was in both.
You're right.
and that was really stressful because I was also at the beach house, and I had to effectively split my days in 2 parts. In the morning or in the evening, I would write, and during the day and in the afternoon, I would be at the beach editing and incorporating Ryan's edits and reading my review again. So basically, I didn't do a single day of vacation mostly because I was constantly checking the review. But that was the only way to do it, and that was the only way that my girlfriend and the dogs could spend some time away from Rome and at the beach.
Right.
And also, every couple of hours, I could take a break.
Sure.
Play on the beach with the dogs. And of course, some days I try to relax. But yeah, it was really tough to be able to finish everything on time because I needed to be able to send the chapters, the finalized chapters, like the intro and setup and design, basically until, I would say until music, to Mike in the first half of August, because Mike was in the United States and he had a lot of free time. And it was the only way to do it if Mike was able to record those chapters as he was in the States and he didn't have anything else to do. he could focus on this and work on the other stuff like iPad and apps and the conclusion when he came back to Europe.
Yeah.
That was tough. Yeah.
It was interesting to watch from the outside as that process unfolded, because I know you didn't want to become the bottleneck in that system because you had both Ryan and Mike relying on you getting them things so that you could move the process forward.
Yes.
And there were
Yes.
these weeks where it just got eerily quiet. I didn't hear much from Federico. I didn't hear much from Ryan. I knew Ryan was very, very, very busy. And then I would occasionally be chatting with Mike. I get what's going on. Mike's working on this. It must have been, and then that's why Federico and Ryan were really quiet yesterday. And it was interesting to kind of see from the from my perspective.
Yeah, I bet, because I've been quiet for 3 months. Really, of course, I haven't been able to write on the site. I haven't been able to contribute to Club MacStories much. But if I want to make this happen every year, this is the only way to do it, because I still need to eat and I still need to sleep.
Yes, those are good things.
If I want to have this kind of project, and hopefully people will appreciate the effort that went into all the aspects, because I mentioned this before, but it's really a multimedia project at this point, with the site that has a special layout, and the ebook and the audiobook and the extras, and collaborating with tons of different people. It's such a huge project, and it's not like something that I can do in the final 2 weeks. Like in August, I say, oh, by the way, I should probably write my iOS 11
Right.
review. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
I had to talk to people at WWDC to ask them about iOS 11 features to developers. I had to send some questions to Apple to get some clarification on some aspects of iOS 11, which is also something that I'm very happy with, that I've been able to double check every single feature or functionality or change from iOS 10 that I wasn't so sure about. There's a ton of different aspects to this, and I didn't want to be, as much as possible, I tried not to be the bottleneck between these multiple people sort of working around me and collaborating with me. I didn't want to be the guy that was slowing everything down.
Right.
And that was really stressful.
Yeah, and as an aside, if anyone wants to hear more about this whole process and what the summer at MacStories is like, that's what App Stories Unplugged is all about. Federico and I just did a long chat for about almost 2 hours, I'd say, about what the summer was like and what the process is like, and a little bit more behind the scenes. So Federico, that kind of takes us to the production part of this, which is several weeks of production. And you already mentioned that you had Mike and Ryan working on it, but there's a lot of website design and other things going on with the ebook and everything. What was that like, and what tools were you using to get all that done?
So I just checked the other day in my email archive the cover images and the animated front cover, which is one of the big new design changes this year. Of course, were realized by the ever so genius Sam Beckett. So Sam works with me on the iOS concept videos that we've been doing for 2 years at this point, and I asked him again, hey, do you wanna do the video? I want to do this animated cover. I don't know if it's possible. Can you tell me if it's possible? And then I also want you to work on the chapter images. And the first email that I sent to Sam was on June 26th. So that was probably the day after I finished my notes. When I realized I want to do something crazy with the design of the website, why don't we do an animation? And the inspiration for that was I think it was either the Mac Pro or I think it was actually the MacBook Pro webpage that Apple has on apple.com, where there's an animated touch bar. And as you scroll down, the touch bar kind of reverses, and then the animation starts over again as you scroll. And that was a really pleasant effect to me. And I wanted to have something tasteful, elegant, but also eye-catchy at the same time. And I think we managed to find a good compromise on that. So yeah, Sam took care of, I guess he uses maybe After Effects, and all the video had to be embedded in a 1080p version to stay around 1 megabyte, otherwise it wouldn't load for most people's on slow connections. And as for the graphics, they were done in both 4K and 1080p, I guess in Sketch, because that's what Sam uses. Then we get to the design of the review itself. Sylvia took care of the design. She did an excellent job. She very patiently listened to my all my crazy ideas for what I wanted to have. So I last year, actually, when we did the iOS 10 review with a special new design, I saved a note with a lot of people complaints about the layout on the site. And so I reopened that note and I went over all the major points. So I wanted to make sure that the top toolbar didn't get in the way of reading too much. So I wanted to have a more subtle, more light look for that toolbar. But also I wanted to improve the navigation of the review, because the long drop down that we did last year, it was nicely integrated with the toolbar, but it had two major flaws. It was too long, so every time you wanted to find a section, you had to scroll the entire drop down
Right.
menu. And also it didn't open relatively to your position in the review. Every time you click the drop down,
Right.
it started from chapter
Right.
1, introduction. So I wanted to have something more visual and also smarter and easier to use. And we went with this grid approach. So the chapters of the review are presented in a grid that opens with a pop-up card on top of the review. And the chapters are presented with thumbnails, of course, also done by Sam. When you open the card, it highlights your current chapter. So if you're halfway through the review, the grid doesn't open starting from chapter 1, it starts from chapter 8. So that's more convenient, so you can jump around more easily. But also, instead of presenting the entire list of sections, so like 50 or 60 sections, we just show you the 18 chapters of the review. And that allows you to quickly jump between chapters. But if you want to dig into a specific section, chapters that have sections inside them have a button that you can press. It's a 3-line button. You press that button and you open a popover that allows you to dig into a specific section. This same popover is used inside a chapter to navigate within the same page or across multiple pages to a specific section. Also, I wanted to allow people to more easily change the dark mode of the review to a new feature. We allow readers to change the font size. So especially for visually impaired users, this is something that I really wanted to have. So you can bump the font size, make it bigger, or if you have great eyesight, well, good for you. And also you can make the font smaller now. I'm kind of jealous because I have to wear eyeglasses. And finally, we now allow readers to generate a bookmark. So you can create a link and you can copy the link to the clipboard, and that link will take you back to the specific spot of the review that you are reading now. Of course, unfortunately, due to how web browsers and this stuff works, we cannot take you straight down to the specific word that you were reading. Safari tries to jump back to the specific paragraph that you were just reading. So that's precise enough to let you jump back into, if you need to do something else or if you want to share a specific paragraph with someone else, now you can do it.
Yeah, I like that feature a lot. That's a great. I just like especially when for sharing. It's a great way to say, "Hey, have you seen this part of the review?" and jump somebody right to it.
Finally, I want to mention how Silvia did an excellent job here. We tried to incorporate this lighter look. We tried to use the San Francisco throughout with multiple weights, with multiple styles of the San Francisco typeface. And also, I should thank also Alessandro, our web developer, because like every year, we were able, at the last minute as always, but he listened to my feedback and we were able to put this together, and he did a fantastic job trying to listen also to my crazy ideas and all my feedback. Sometimes I get nervous, sometimes I'm really stressed out, and I take it out on the people that are closer to me. So Silvia and Alessandro definitely, they are super patient with me.
Yeah, the website is definitely really cool. I mean, it's very much custom compared to what the normal website, the way it works.
Yeah, and I think this kind of project deserves something special, and also because I don't usually write this kind of big story
Right.
on the site every day. So you need better navigation tools, you need better reading tools, and hopefully people will appreciate what we've done here. And maybe we can do something even better next year. Who knows?
Right. No, and what also is good, I think, is that some of those features that have been built specifically for these reviews that you've done the last couple of years are features that we can use on other long form stuff that people write on the sites. Things like I'm thinking about, pull quotes and asides and that sort of thing.
Yeah, in a way, it's like people don't understand why space exploration is important. People don't understand why the government needs to fund organization like NASA, for example. And I think one of the big reasons is that space exploration allows you to invest on new technologies that later trickle down to us on Earth. And so many of our modern inventions actually came as stuff that you needed to create for astronauts.
Right.
And in a way, this is the same reasoning. This is a special project, and this is my moonshot in a way. And the technologies that we develop here are very much custom made initially, but then they trickle down to the normal posts on the site and the normal articles and reviews that we do every day. So it's a way for us to investing on this stuff initially is just for me and just for the review, but then we can use that knowledge and we can use that code and that foundation to make it available to every writer on the site. And I think it's a good approach.
Yep, I agree. It's really nice. It's been fun to kind of use some of those things over the last year because I know a lot of these were introduced in the iOS 10 review as well.
Yeah.
So what other apps did you highlight in the review? I know that you tried a lot of third-party apps in preparation for this, and there's still a few I think we haven't covered yet.
So let's see. Devon think I already mentioned.
Right.
I used it as an example for drag and drop in the new design. And there's also, in terms of new design, Just Press Record, which is a voice recorder for iOS that uses actually has a beautiful new iOS 11 inspired design, which this is a great alternative to the voice memos app on your iPhone. So I really recommend it. I used a lot Yoink, which is a shelf type app for the iPad that allows you to pin and to save stuff for later using drag and drop. It was inspired, I guess, by my concept of the shelf for the iOS 11 concept videos. A lot of developers actually made shelf type apps, and they actually emailed me saying, "Hey, we were inspired by your video. Can you help us test this beta shelf app that we have?" But Yoink is so far my favorite. It has an excellent design, a bunch of integrations with the system like a file provider extension and a custom keyboard. I also want to mention Castro, the podcast client by Supertop. They have this excellent integration with drag and drop on the iPhone. So on the iPhone, drag and drop is limited to within the same application. And in Castro, they take advantage of this system behavior to let you easily manage episodes that you want to listen to. So you can pick up a bunch of episodes from your inbox and drop them into the queue. Then you can rearrange stuff in the queue using the system provided drag and drop. It's really well done. And I also want to mention Lookup, which is this dictionary that has a camera mode that uses Core ML to recognize stuff around you. I want to mention Hold, which is an NFC tag reader. So you can open this app and uses the new Core NFC framework on iOS 11 to read physical NFC tags. And the final two I would say are Todoist, which has a new update with Siri key integration, which I'm using all the time to save new tasks using Siri, and drag and drop support. So you can drop text, you can drop email messages, you can drop links and files into either projects or the inbox or into existing tasks. So that's really well done. And finally, quick support by TeamViewer, which is this app that lets you share your screen remotely. So you can watch other people's home screens and actually entire iOS device screen. Uses the Replay Kit 2 framework on iOS 11 to let you share your screen directly from Control Center. It's really well done. And we're gonna have, of course, a lot more reviews on MacStories later this week and next week and going forward. But these are the highlights of the apps that I mentioned in my review.
Yeah, I suspect that you and I are going to have a lot of material for a very long time on App Stories to talk about after having, I think you've got around 100 betas and I've got around 75. So there's going to be no shortage of content for App Stories for the next several months. So I'm looking forward to talking about all that with you.
Yeah, it's going to be fun for sure.
Yeah. And congratulations, Federico. I know that this is like a really long haul for you every summer, and I know how good it feels for all of us, really, but especially you, to launch the review every year. And it's great to see it out there and on the website.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really happy.
Well, that's it for this week, folks. Thanks again to our sponsors, iMazing and Readle. We'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, head on over to appstories.net to check out the show notes. And if you've been enjoying the show, please consider rating it on iTunes. As always, you can find both of us on MacStories.net, where we're going to have tons and tons of coverage of iOS 11 and apps with iOS 11 features over the next several weeks. Federico is also on Twitter. He's at Viticci, that's Viticci, and I'm at John Voorhees, JohnVoorhees. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.